Well, welcome back. This is the second presentation of Chapter 9, Participation, Campaigns, and Elections. We're going to continue talking about how different demographic features like gender and religion affect the way people participate. Then we're going to talk a little bit about some of the rules that govern campaigns and elections. So let's talk a little bit about gender. We've already discussed gender to some extent. Women register to vote at similar rates to men, but are generally more likely to vote. That wasn't always the case. In 2018, you had a very high turnout 2018 midterm election with 55% of eligible women voting as opposed to 52% of men. The significance of gender issues in American politics has contributed steadily to the gender gap, which can sometimes rise to more than 10% difference between women and men in terms of how they vote. And again, that refers to that sense in which women tend to support Democrats over Republicans. I think certainly with the Dobbs decision, that is probably going to persist for at least a certain period of time. I think Donald Trump's continued dominance of the Republican Party will likely contribute to that as well. He is widely viewed by many women as hostile to women's issues. In 2016, Donald Trump's candidacy produced a 54 to 41 gender gap, 13 points. The 2020 presidential election again saw an increased gender gap. And it was only the second time in the period from 1952 to 2020 that white women supported a Democratic candidate. So I think you can say that, broadly speaking, that women are not buying what Donald Trump is selling. And the question, will the Trump effect persist into the 2024 election? I think is a serious one. It's one that we need to, we social scientists are watching closely. Religion, again, is very important. Religious infrastructure provides an important basis for participation for many Americans, particularly among Black Americans. Religious institutions provided an essential organizational basis for the civil rights movement. In the 1970s and 80s, white evangelical Americans used mail order appeals and televangelism to build non-college educated white Americans into a very formidable and coherent voting bloc. Jewish Americans are less likely to participate through synagogues and more likely to use special, action agencies like the American Jewish Congress or the Anti-Defamation League as fulcrums for their participation. Some of the most divisive, issues today reflect a values divide between more religious and more secular Americans, particularly LGBTQ+ rights, contraception, abortion, same-sex marriage. These are things that, transgender issues. These are things that reflect that sense in which people who are devoutly religious oftentimes feel that those issues reflect some kind of moral question, that their religion tells them, the actions contemplated are sinful in their eyes. Again, generally speaking, more intensely religious Americans are more likely to support Republicans. The exception, of course, are Black Americans, who remain some of the strongest members of the Democratic Party's electoral coalition. So state electoral laws regulate most voting. This is part of the Constitution. The Constitution generally designates or authorizes the states to set most rules. Rules, however, their power to set rules have been limited by the 14th Amendment and the fact that Congress can legislate on electoral rules, and under the Supremacy Clause, federal rules would tend to prevail. State electoral laws regulate most voting. Presidential elections are held every 4 years. They're conducted on the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November of a presidential election year. There's an important distinction between presidential and midterm election cycles. Generally speaking, turnout is much lower in midterm elections. Presidential elections, again, because competition for the presidency is so intense, tend to produce higher turnout. Still not as high a turnout as you would see in many other industrial democratic nations. American elections are highly decentralized and administered by state, county, and city election boards. State and local governments establish and staff polling places, process mail-in ballots, and verify the eligibility of voters. And that's one of the reasons why it's very hard to rig an American election, because it is so, decentralized. In primary elections, state rules to decide whether to conduct open or closed primaries. With open primaries, anyone can participate. With closed primaries, only members of the party, which excludes, if here in Oklahoma, the Republican primary elections are closed. That means that if you're a registered Democrat or Republican, you do not have the option of voting in those elections. States control voter registration and voting itself, which creates, again, wide variation in the laws governing elections and voting. These variations produce wide variance in voter turnout, with some states that have highly permissive registration and voting requirements having turnouts in excess of 70%. With other states experiencing a turnout of around 42%. And Oklahoma's turnout is around, is among the lowest in the country for a variety of reasons. Registration requirements. Non-registration is the most common reason that people in the United States give for not voting. In the 1990s, the motor voter law made it so that you could go to a DMV or a tag agency to register to vote. That did increase registration. It did not appreciably increase voting, however. Young Americans are less likely to be registered than older Americans, along with low-income and transient Americans. Voter ID laws, I'll mention that briefly, have oftentimes had the effect of making it harder for people to get registered to vote. Most advanced democratic countries have automatic voter registration, where, again, if you are a citizen, you are automatically registered, and your registration follows you wherever you go. States with automatic voter registration, AVR, or same-day registration, again, have voter turnouts far above the national average. So how do you go about registering to vote? How do I know how to register? You can actually go to a website. It's easy enough to do. All that information is on the website. What information do you need to provide? You have to demonstrate that you're a U.S. citizen and that you are age appropriate. Many states have, again, photo ID requirements. Which address should you use? That's if you're a student, it's up to you whether you want to vote in the district where you're going to school, or if you want to go back, and register where your parents are. Am I required to register with a political party? In most states, you can register as an independent. And that is, again, kind of a third option to being a Democrat or a Republican. Voting, where can you vote? Again, you can call, you can go to vote411.org. And you can enter your address, and they'll show your precinct and where you need to go. Number 6, what's on the ballot? You can, again, all the websites have all the information for anything, including candidates, what offices are up, and what state ballot initiatives or referenda are on the ballot. So you can learn get information about how you should vote on those things. What will happen at the polling place? Typically, you check in, you show who you are, you give your name, they check you off because you have to be registered in order to vote. And then they give you a ballot, and you go and fill it out, and then you feed it into a machine typically, or you give it back to an election worker, and they'll tabulate it. So what happens if you have a problem voting? You find a poll worker and tell them what your problem is, and they'll help you out. Voter identification requirements, again, under the rationale of voter integrity, a lot of states have adopted voter identification laws. In most states, strict voter ID laws have reduced turnout rates, especially among racial minorities, the elderly, the young, and low-income voters. And again, the most commonly accepted voter ID that's accepted is a driver's license. And if you don't have a car, or if you are elderly and don't drive anymore, or whatever, I mean, for a variety of reasons, you may not have a driver's license, and that makes it hard. And you have to figure out some other way to prove that you are who you are. And that has a tendency to cause people to shy away from going to turn out to vote. Studies suggest that voter ID laws reduce turnout by 2 to 3%, and strict voter ID laws create what is known as a disparate impact on racial and ethnic minorities. Many racial and ethnic groups lack the documentation required to obtain a government-issued identification. And in my view, if you're going to require someone to show some sort of identity, and again, what does voter ID law prevent? It prevents in-person voter fraud, which is something that simply does not happen in any significant numbers in the United States, and maybe half a dozen instances annually in a nation the size of the United States. Small numbers like that do not change, do not alter the nature of an election outcome. So voter ID laws really don't secure the integrity of elections. Voter registration does. The ballot. State and county governments are responsible for running elections and creating ballots. Most states now use computerized voting systems, which again, there are some conservatives who think that that's vulnerable to manipulation. They want to get rid of all computers. I think that's absurd. In the 2000 presidential election, you actually had problems in Florida, where there were, again, butterfly ballots that were problematical because they confused people. Congress passed the Help America Vote Act, the HAVA Act in 2003, helping states to mandating that states use computerized voter registration databases. Fears of election hacking have led to updates and greater security, but again, it also feeds conspiracy theories about stolen elections. And again, most computer systems, if you go to vote here in Oklahoma, you're almost certainly going to feed your ballot into a voting machine. That machine is not networked. It does not go into the outside world. So there is no way for someone to hack into it and change the nature of how that thing is happening. And again, there are hundreds of precincts here in Oklahoma. So the ability that, one person to hack into all the machines and all the different precincts, it's simply not practicable. So that's it for this presentation. When we come back, we will continue our discussion of campaigns, voting, and elections. I'll see you next time.